Medyo masakit yung mga images, ano? Isip mo yung mga sasakyan, ganun-ganun na lang nasunog. I mean, it is a pay parking lot. That's number one. But number two, is this considered force majeure or an act of God?
Well, our civil code provides a definition of what a fortuitous event. Generally, it is something that is unforeseen, or even if you can foresee it, it's inevitable. But this is only a general rule to avoid any liability. Because if the damage is accompanied by a human act, either by negligence or let's say you contributed to the damage, then the act of God is humanized, no? And when the act of God is humanized, it's no longer an act of God, but an act of man. But I think the more important issue here is what would govern the relationship between a person parking his vehicle in a parking space. Kasi our Supreme Court is, there are cases where in the Supreme Court held that it is a contract of deposit that is constituted, especially if it's a hotel where you park your car inside. There are also cases naman where waiver of liability was also upheld by the Supreme Court as the law between the parties. Normally, when you park in big parking spaces, there's a waiver in the ticket, diba?
That we fail to see.
Yes. So,
because it's too small to
yes. So the question now is,
It's too small to
No, I mean, and who would really take time?
Yeah.
From, you know, from when they hand it
saka
over to
parang-
you. Sino magbabasa?
Pero hindi mo naman pinirmahan yun, ah.
And correct me if I'm wrong though, pero they can actually write whatever. Tapos kung desperado ka, papatulan mo rin naman yung parking attorney.
that is what we call a contract of adhesion. You do not actually have a choice. It is made only by one party. You just have to take it. And our courts naman, when it comes to contract of adhesions, would interpret it against the party providing that stipulation. So it's always subject to challenge. Kahit sabihin mo na you have that provision, parties can always contest
So,
that.
ibig sabihin, pag tinanggap mo yung parking ticket, you're agreeing to whatever is
Yung
written.
terms and conditions.
Yes,
Parang yung mga app, di ba?
Yes,
Yung
supposedly,
agree.
this is where Congress and even our LGUs can come in. Because if, for example, there will be an ordinance requiring parking lots to provide a mandatory insurance in case of damage, then these things would be avoided. Or if Congress would legislate a law requiring that parking companies would also have an insurance, or at least the waiver of liability would be prohibited, then these things could be avoided and car owners will be protected. So maybe we can consider this as a call to action by Congress. And
Okay,
the
so we need to
LGUs.
legislate very
Yes.
specific laws. But attorney, in this specific case, the company operating the parking lot, Philippine Skylanders, sinabi niya, okay, I will pay for all the damage for across all the 19 vehicles, but they did not admit any liability. It's also not their fault. Is giving help an admission sort of liability?
Well, that is
Indirectly.
Usually in many cases when you settle cases, normally there's always that provision that without necessarily an admission of liability. It's a standard phrase. But at the end of the day, I think what's good here is that there is willingness to compensate.
Mababawi naman.
But the question is, I do not know how much they will be.
Yeah, yung scope ng kaya nilang
Kung full
i-cover.
coverage.
Or if they're even insured or not, it depends.
Yes, because yung insurance naman, that is where the act of God provision would come into play. So normally, when you have your car insured, you have an option to include yung acts of God.
Correct.
And then, pag
tataas yung premium mo.
madadagdagan yung premium mo, but that's really better than to risk it, no, na ordinary damage lang yung liability
Pero iba
ng
pa,
company.
iba pa yung act of God, di ba? Sabi niyo nga po, act of man ito. So that's a different provision.
No, ang sinasabi ko po, generally, things that are beyond our control is an act of God. for instance, yung Undoy,
Bagyo.
typhoon,
Yes.
Lindol, mga
lindol,
ganyan.
But this
ganyan.
one?
But if it is accompanied by human intervention, for example, the one who's supposed to be responsible failed to act immediately, wala silang mga fire extinguishers doon, or they contributed to the damage kasi hinayaan nilang tububo yung mga dahon, then they may be liable because the act of God is humanized. It becomes now
So, Attorney,
an act of man.
Right. So long story short, no, based on the many factors and elements in this particular case, basically, if it goes to court, talagang, kumbaga, the judge will have to be the judge.
Well,
true to sense.
it's a matter of evidence, and let's not preempt also the investigation because the fire department is conducting its investigation on the matter. Malalaman natin. Kasi it's also possible that the source came from one car. That can also be possible. Kaya lang nag-escalate lumaki. So doon sa you could have prevented it to escalate, yun yung medyo challenge.
O like questions like, meron ka bang fire equipment or anti-fire equipment doon, may handy extinguishers, things
Yes,
like that will come into play.
Yes.
So, in general, for people with businesses who might be watching, of course, fires can happen anywhere naman, attorney. What kind of coverage should people be looking for, or what kind of safeguards in the law should people be looking for?
Well, I think insurance is a very important factor so that this would be resolved. Kasi if you have an insurance, the insurance will take care of everything.
Oo, kaya lang medyo may gray area pa nga dito na sabi niyo. So pagka na-classify ito as an act of man, hindi siya covered? Or depending doon sa naka-cover?
Yung fortuitous event exempts you from any liability. So, for example, you're supposed to do something but you are prevented because of a fortuitous event, exempted ka na. You have no liability.
Okay.
But if that fortuitous event is accompanied by human intervention or negligence or lapse, then it's no longer considered an act of God. Kasi yung
Okay.
act of God na humanize, nagiging act of man na.
Attorney, what if isa ako doon sa mga car owners, I accepted the compensation but I'm not satisfied with it? Can I file a case of some sort?
Well, normally, if management will offer to settle, you will have to sign a
Yun nga eh.
waiver. So
Right.
it's your choice. If you're not satisfied with the offer of settlement, then your option is to seek other remedies.
Yung Philippine Skylanders International, they are a concessionaire of this lot beside NAIA 3. Is it possible that the owner of the lot may be also responsible because it is his environment, pinapalis lang niya kumbaga?
Well, generally, if it's a juridical entity is a corporation created by law, the liability is generally limited to the enterprise, to the company. But if there is fraud and all, so even the owners, to a certain extent, may be held liable.
Let's re-ask that question in a different way. Is the Airport Authority, MIAA, are they liable in any way? Or dahil ba in-outsource na nila yung management and operation of the parking lot, doon na mismo sa operator ng parking lot, mata-transfer yung liability?
Well, technically, since they do not have any responsibility there, yung responsibility nandun lang talaga sa nag-ooperate. But of course, if it is also shown that they have been negligent in probably choosing the operator, then there may also be some certain degree of liability. But generally, kung sino yung responsible And besides,
Kumbaga parang nung nirentahan mo, alam mo yan yung nirentahan mo.
Ano yan the contract is between the car owners and the concessionaire, not
Okay.
MIAA.
And kung ikaw naman yung car owner and sabihin mo, oh, naku, ang tagal kung hantayin ko pa yung compensation from the car park operator, meron naman akong insurance attorney. And let's say, yung insurance ko, chinek ko yung acts of God or all these fortuitous events. Basically, lahat ng checkboxes, chinek ko. Will I just be able to easily claim it na rin? Para mas madali?
Yes, of course, that is an option. In fact, once you avail of your insurance, hindi ka pwedeng magke-claim ng another insurance. Yung double compensation is prohibited. No? So, it's really your choice. And this is where insurance nga, the importance of having an insurance come into play.
So just to clarify, what you're saying is, kunwari meron akong kotse doon, tulad ni Riza, tapos nasunog siya. Pero let's say, nag-o-offer yung insurance ng car park operator. Pero nag-o-offer din yung insurance ko, I can only opt to take one of the rewards.
I would think so because that would be double compensation.
Attorney, in another scenario, parking pa rin, you park your car, and then nanakawan yung vehicle. On scenarios like that, hindi kasing laki nitong sunog na to, who is going to be liable on that case?
Then again, we go back to the
What's
first
the fine
premise,
print?
what is the nature of the contract? If it is a contract of deposit, kagaya ng sa mga hotels, then the hotel is supposed to be liable. But if it's a plain and simple parking space and there's a provision of you're supposed to not leave your valuables, that's a contentious issue. Pwedeng i-invoke pa rin ng operator na we had the warning and you did not.
Yung mga signs na parang the management is not liable for any losses.
And even dun sa fine print sa ticket nakalagay, di ba? Please do not leave anything in your vehicles. Management will not be liable for any losses.
May mga nagpapatanong, attorney, what if the car itself is stolen?
That's a different story nga. And as I said, it becomes a contentious issue, lalo na kung may bayad. Kaya ka nga nag-park
Correct.
Kaya ka nag-park kasi you expect
yung
security.
safety
Correct.
yun.
Oo. If the parking company will just say, hindi kami liable dyan. Parang, I think you can really challenge
Yun na.
the waiver of responsibility provision.
So do we have to read talaga itong mga tickets na
Kaya nga,
bibigay?
hindi. Sino ba
Kasi
nagmamadali eh?
Oo, tsaka ang liit po ng mga sulat.
Yun nga, it's a contract of adhesion. You can always challenge. Wag mo na lang pirmahan.
Wag mo na
And
lang
you can
pirmahan.
always argue
Kasi
na
kumbaga parang
hindi
hindi
mo
ka naman
nabasa.
nakapag-respond.
Yes.
Diba? Binigay lang sa'yo. There's no
Conforme.
consent.
Oo.
Yeah, yun.
In other words, wala kang choice eh. That's why sabi ko nga, LGUs should consider coming up with an ordinance.
Legislation.
No? If Congress could not act on this.
this
Because
is-
may
this is,
pending
So kaya
bill
ng
na
City
eh.
Hall.
May pending bill na.
May pending bill na eh. Ang tagal na eh. Pero wala din mga nangyayari, no? So, tingin ko yung LGU can take the cudgels for the
Paano kung
motorist.
nagasgasan ang
Ayun
kotse
nga,
mo?
attorney. Sino hahabulin doon?
Well, of course, generally, kung mahuli kung sino yung nanggasgas, di siya yung primary. Then again, whether or not the parking company would be liable, again, will depend on the circumstances. And as I said nga, maybe the LGUs can simply come up with a requirement that all parking spaces for a fee should ensure that there is an insurance for damages before they issue the
Right.
business permit.
Attorney-
Then that would help motorists.